Welcome to this journey through the darkest and deepest wisdom of Fyodor Dostoevsky, a calm, slow, and whispering voice that will accompany you as you fall into sleep. Take a deep breath. Let the words slide like a nocturnal river. Today we are not going to summarize. We are going to inhabit Dostoevsky's thought as he lived it. From the Siberian dungeons to the sewers of St. Petersburg, from the delirium of the possessed to the almost impossible light of redemption. Imagine that you are lying in a room barely lit by an oil lamp, and I, like an old narrator who has read too much and slept too little, am going to tell you his entire philosophy, without haste, without jumps, so that your mind glides gently into the night. It all begins with a man who in 1849, at the age of 28, is standing in front of a firing squad in Semyonovsky Square in St. Petersburg. He has been sentenced to death for reading forbidden texts and discussing utopian socialist ideas. The soldiers raise their rifles. Dostoevsky feels the cold of the barrel on the back of his neck. He counts the seconds, and suddenly a messenger from the Tsarist arrives at a gallop with the pardon. The sentence is commuted to 4 years of hard labor in Siberia, and then a private soldier for life. At that exact moment, when death brushes his skin and moves away, Dostoevsky understands the first truth he will never abandon. Human life has no rational price. It is an absurd miracle, an undeserved gift that can be snatched away at any second, and that awareness of imminent death is what will make all his characters live in a permanent state of fever, as if every heartbeat were the heart shouting, "I am alive. I am alive against all logic." Years later, in the Omsk prison, among thieves, murderers, and rapists, Dostoevsky discovers that the human being is neither good nor bad by nature, as Rousseau or the French socialists he admired so much as a young man believed. Man is an abyss, an absolute freedom that can choose to be an angel or a demon in the same breath there. Chained, sick with epilepsy, humiliated, he secretly writes the first lines of what will be memories of the House of the Dead, and understands that true freedom is not outside, in institutions or in revolution, but within. Even the most chained prisoner can be inwardly freer than his jailer if he accepts his suffering and transforms it into love or knowledge. That is the seed of all his future philosophy. Suffering is not an accident to be eliminated. It is the only real way to the depth of the soul. Without suffering there is no conscience. Without conscience there is no freedom. And without freedom there is no person. That is why when years later he writes Crime and Punishment, he will have Raskolnikov walk through the burning streets of Petersburg with the idea that superior men, like Napoleon, have the right to transgress common morality to advance humanity. Raskolnikov kills the old usurer believing that it is an arithmetic act, a cold calculation that will justify the end. But as soon as he spills blood, something breaks inside him. He feels nauseous, he trembles, he faints, and Dostoevsky whispers in our ears that the most brilliant theory crashes against the living reality of a single human being, because no human being is a figure. Not even the old moneylender is just a lice, as Raskolnikov calls her. Each person carries within an infinite universe, and killing a universe is committing a cosmic crime that haunts you even in your dreams. Guilt is not a bourgeois moral feeling. It is the voice of God speaking through your own flesh. And the only way out of that guilt is not reason. It is not ideological justification. It is voluntary humiliation, the repentance that leads you to kiss the earth you have stained. That is why Raskolnikov ends up confessing, not because he is caught, but because his own body and soul are sick to the point of making it unbearable to continue living with the lie. And in the epilogue, in Siberia, again Siberia, always Siberia, when Sonia Marmeladova reads him the Gospel of Lazarus, Raskolnikov cries for the first time, and something begins to resurrect in him. Dostoevsky does not promise that he will be a saint. He only promises that he has begun to live truly, because for him the resurrection is never clean or triumphant. It is slow, dirty, full of relapses, like life itself. And here we breathe together. Feel how your chest rises and falls. Very well. Now we slide towards the idiot, where Dostoevsky tries to answer the most impossible question. What would happen if Christ returned to earth today, but as an absolutely good man, without miraculous power, without an army, without grandiloquent speech, only with pure goodness? Prince Mishkin is that man, epileptic like Dostoevsky himself, naive to the point of scandal, incapable of lying, incapable of judging. And society declares him an idiot, because absolute goodness in a world ruled by pride, money, and unbridled sexual desire becomes an unbearable provocation. Everyone wants to corrupt him, use him, humiliate him. Nastasia Filipovna falls in love and self-destructs in front of him. Rogozin loves and hates him at the same time, even wanting to stab him. And Mishkin, in the midst of the turmoil, can only offer infinite compassion. But Dostoevsky is relentless. Pure goodness does not defeat evil with magic. Evil crushes it, crucifies it again. In the end, Mishkin ends up catatonic, turned into a vegetable, and Rogozin in prison. The conclusion is terrifying. Modern man can no longer bear Christ, declares him mentally ill, and goes on with his life. But at the same time, Dostoevsky drops a spark. Precisely because goodness does not triumph in this world, it is the only proof that there is another world, that there is something beyond calculation and instinct. Mishkin's absurd beauty, beauty will save the world, he says, is not aesthetic. It is ontological. Beauty is the presence of the divine being in the midst of the ugliness of sin, and that beauty hurts, burns, crucifies those who carry it and those who contemplate it. Breathe it slower. Feel the air enter cold through your nose and exit warm. Very good. Now we enter the basement. Notes from Underground. Dostoevsky's most poisonous and prophetic work. A retired, anonymous civil servant with liver disease talks to himself in a damp room and spits in our faces that all progress, all enlightened reason, all utopian socialism are a fantasy for children, because man does not want rational happiness. If tomorrow they invented a perfect society where everyone had bread, shelter, and guaranteed sex, man would break the glass of the Crystal Palace to do something absurd, cruel, just to prove that he is free. Freedom for Dostoevsky is more important than happiness, and that freedom is terrible because it includes the freedom to self-destruct. The man in the underground hates the logic of 2 + 2 = 4 because it reduces him to a piano key. He prefers 2 + 2 to = 5 if that affirms his personality. Here Dostoevsky anticipates the entire 20th century. Nihilism, existentialism, totalitarian ideologies that promise paradise and deliver concentration camps, because when man rejects God, he does not become a peaceful atheist, he becomes a demon, and the most dangerous demon is the one who believes he is building heaven on earth. Now we come to the great political prophecy, the demons. Dostoevsky had witnessed the birth of nihilistic revolutionary groups in the 1860s, and in 1871, he wrote the most chilling novel about how an abstract idea, social justice, progress, can possess intelligent people and turn them into cold-blooded killers. Shigalov, Verjavensky, Stavrogin, they all believe they are serving humanity, but in reality they are possessed by demons whispering in their ears. Stavrogin is the center, a beautiful, intelligent, brave man, capable of the greatest feats and the greatest baseness. He has raped a girl and driven her to suicide, but he does not even feel enough guilt. He is absolute emptiness. Dostoevsky presents him as the man who has killed God within himself and has nothing left, neither good nor evil, only boredom. And from that boredom all crimes are born. The novel ends in massacre, suicides, fires, and the message is brutal. When man says God is dead, everything is permitted. He does not free himself. He becomes a slave to his basest passions and drags others into the abyss. But even here Dostoevsky leaves a small glimmer of light. The Staryets Tikhon tells Stavrogin that the only salvation would be to accept public humiliation, to confess his crime against the girl before the whole town. Stavrogin cannot. He is too proud, and he hangs himself. Pride is the original sin for Dostoevsky, the pride of wanting to be God without God. And finally we come to the cathedral, to the Brothers Karamazov, the work that Dostoevsky did not manage to finish and which contains his entire philosophy as a testament. Everything is here. Ivan's militant atheism, Alyosha's earthly holiness, Dmitri's desperate sensuality, the cynical nihilism of the servant Smerdyakov, and above all, the legend of the Grand Inquisitor. Ivan tells a parable. Christ returns to Seville in the 16th century, performs miracles, the crowd acclaims him, and the Grand Inquisitor, an elderly cardinal, has him arrested in his cell. He explains why the church had to correct his work. Because men do not want freedom. They want bread, miracles, and authority. Christ offered them freedom, and they could not bear it. So the church took away the burden of being free and gave them happiness in exchange for their souls. The Inquisitor ends by saying, "Go and never come back." And Christ, in silence, kisses him on his withered lips. That kiss burns the Inquisitor's soul, but he has no regrets. Dostoevsky leaves us with an open question. Was the Inquisitor right? Is man too weak for the freedom that Christ gave him? And the answer is given by Zosima, the Starets. No. Man can be free if he accepts total responsibility for his freedom and lives in active love. Active love is not a feeling. It is taking responsibility for the sins of all. Each of us is guilty for everyone and for everything. Alyosha goes out into the world to live that. And in the end, at the grave of the child Ilyusha, he says to the children, "Let us always remember how we loved each other here." That is Dostoevsky's last word. The memory of love lived is stronger than death. Let us now slow down even more, as if walking barefoot on the Siberian snow that Dostoevsky never forgot. He always said that prison had saved his soul because it took away all his illusions about man and, at the same time, showed him that even in the worst criminal there is a spark that can be ignited. Remember the scene in Memoirs from the House of the Dead, when, on Easter night, the prisoners, chained and dirty, begin to sing the Christological hymn, "May God rise again and his enemies be scattered." And suddenly those broken throats sound like angels. Dostoevsky weeps silently because he understands that the image of God is never completely erased, not even under 10 years of shackles. That is his definitive anthropology. Man is a broken icon, but an icon nonetheless. And as long as there is a breath of life, the icon can be restored. Breathe. Feel how the air is colder now, as if we were inside that frozen hut. And from there we jump to an idea that Dostoevsky repeats like an obsessive mantra in his letters and notebooks. If God does not exist, everything is permitted. It is not a pretty phrase. It is a cry of terror, because he experienced it in his own flesh. During his epileptic seizures, he would fall to the ground convulsing, and, in the exact second before losing consciousness, he would experience absolute enlightenment. He would see the total meaning of existence. He would feel that time had stopped and that everything was infinite harmony. And then came the fall, the emptiness, the drool, the shame, and he understood that the harmony he glimpsed was not a product of his diseased brain, but was the true reality that we normally cannot bear. That is why ordinary people prefer to live on the surface, in noise, in money, in sex, in ideology, anything rather than face that blinding light. And when someone tries to live according to that light, Mishkin, Zosima, Alyosha, the world destroys them. But Dostoevsky does not remain pessimistic. He believes that epilepsy, suffering, poverty, and humiliation are precisely the only paths that force us to look toward that light. Pain is the gospel of losers, of the sick, of prostitutes, of drunks, because only those who have hit rock bottom know that they cannot sustain themselves, and in that moment they can cry out, "Lord, have mercy," and be heard. Feel how your body weighs more, how the sheets become warmer. Very good. Now we slip into one of his less talked about obsessions. Money or Dostoevsky. Money is the modern Antichrist, not because it is evil in itself, but because it turns men into countable things, in crime and punishment. The old moneylender lives surrounded by objects she has bought with the misery of others. In The Gambler, roulette is a caricature of money, the promise of multiplying everything without effort, the illusion that life can be solved with a single masterstroke. And Dostoevsky, who was a compulsive gambler to the point of delirium, knew what he was talking about. He lost everything several times, pawned his wife's coat in winter, wrote The Gambler in 26 days to pay off debts, and in the midst of that ruin he discovered that the passion for money is the crudest form of the passion for absolute power. Wanting to have money is wanting to have others in the palm of your hand, and that is what makes modern, underground men so dangerous. They no longer need crowns or armies, just a bank account and an algorithm. But Dostoevsky whispers to us that money never satisfies, because human desire is infinite. Only the infinite satisfies infinite desire, and that is why the rich in his novels always end up committing suicide or going mad. Breathe again, deeper. The air hardly makes a sound as it enters. Now we come to a subject that hurt him like an open wound. In The Demons, there is Stavrogin confession, just a few pages that Dostoevsky left out of the published text for fear of censorship. Stavrogin recounts how he forced himself on an 11-year-old girl and then stood by and watched as she hanged herself. And the worst thing is not the act itself, but that he feels almost nothing. That scene is the 0 point of Dostoevsky's philosophy. If man can reach that point and not shed a tear, then God must exist, because if God does not exist, that act is just a biological accident with no cosmic significance. But if God exists, then every tear of that girl weighs more than the entire universe. And Dostoevsky believes that it does weigh more. He believes that God collects those tears, and that one day Stavrogin will have to face them. That is why he never allows the easy suicide of despair. Even Stavrogin, when he hangs himself, leaves a note saying, "Blame no one, only me." Until the end there is a remnant of responsibility, and that responsibility is what makes us human. Little by little your mind drifts away. The images become blurred, as if you were seeing everything through a fogged-up window. Very well, now we are heading towards the end, which is not, in reality, a beginning. In the last years of his life, Dostoevsky wrote the Diary of a Writer, monthly columns where he talked about everything: trials, children run over, women beaten, wars, the fate of Russia. And he always repeated the same idea. Russia will save the world because it carries the suffering of Christ in its soul, not the triumphant Christ of the West, but the humiliated Christ, the suffering servant. And that salvation will not come through force or intelligence. It will come through the capacity for compassion. The Russian word stratany means both suffering and compassion, to suffer with the other. And Dostoevsky believed that the Russian people, with centuries of servitude, hunger, and pogroms, had learned to suffer with the other in a way that the West had already forgotten. That is why he hated Catholicism, for him a political betrayal of Christ, and feared socialism, for him another atheistic betrayal. Only Orthodoxy, with its liturgy of tears and its icon of the Trinity by Rublev, preserved the image of God who humbles himself to save. And in Pushkin's speech, the last he gave in public, 3 years before his death, Dostoevsky wept in front of thousands of people and said that Russia's mission was to become the people who would serve all peoples, who would bear the pain of all. The crowd gave him a standing ovation, and he fainted from emotion. 8 months later he was dead. But before he died, he asked to be read the parable of the prodigal son, and he said, "I am like that son. I have spent everything. I have lived in the mud, and yet the Father welcomes me." Those were almost his last words. Let us now enter into the folds that almost no one opens, into the thoughts that Dostoevsky barely whispered in letters to his closest friends or hid between the lines, so that only those who had already suffered would find them. For example, the idea that terrified and fascinated him at the same time, that evil can be infinitely more seductive than good. He saw it in himself, in the years of roulette, when he lost his last ruble and still felt an almost erotic pleasure in throwing the dice once more. He saw it in the women he loved madly and who humiliated him. He saw it in the revolutionaries he admired as a young man and who later wanted to shoot him. Evil has style. It has fire. It has intensity. Good, on the other hand, is often pale, clumsy, almost shameful. Mishkin stutters, Zosima smells of earth. Sonia Marmeladova's face is ravaged by tuberculosis. While Stavrogin is beautiful like a fallen archangel, Raskolnikov has burning eyes. Even old Karamazov, with all his rottenness, is magnetic, makes people laugh, fills the room. Dostoevsky confesses in a letter that he sometimes found it difficult not to fall in love with his own literary demons, and that is one of his most uncomfortable truths. The devil does not come with horns. He comes with talent, with intelligence, with charisma, with the promise that you will live stronger, higher, without chains. And only after you have surrendered does he show you the emptiness. Breathe. Feel how the air is barely moving. It is just a thread. Very well. Another idea that almost no one mentions. Dostoevsky believed that psychological time does not exist, that all the moments of our lives are happening at the same time somewhere in the soul. That's why his characters suddenly remember, in the middle of a sentence, something that happened 20 years ago, and that memory hits them harder than what is in front of them. That's why sleep and wakefulness are constantly mixed. That's why a second before an epileptic seizure, he saw the whole of eternity. He was convinced that death is not a cut, The door that opens and suddenly you understand that everything you lived was connected, that every tear you shed out of shame at 15 was necessary, so that you could feel compassion for a stranger at 40, and that God keeps every fragment like a mosaic that only at the end reveals the image. That's why you must never despair, not even of the worst criminal. His soul continues to weave, even if he doesn't know it. Now your breathing is so slow that it almost seems like you're not breathing. Perfect. Now let's move on to something that hurt him deeply, envy. Dostoevsky was deeply envious. He envied Turgenev's health, Tolstoy's quiet success, the serene beauty of his female characters, and he confessed it unadorned in his letters. But he turned that envy into a philosophical tool. Envy is the most revealing feeling of the human soul, because it shows you exactly where you believe true life lies. If you envy money, it is because you believe that life lies in money. If you envy beauty, it is because you believe that life lies in beauty. And Dostoevsky envied one thing above all else: the ability to believe without doubt. He was never able to believe like a child or like the people. His faith was a torn faith, conquered with claws, always on the verge of atheism. In a famous letter he writes to a woman, "My Hosanna has passed through a crucible of doubts," and that is the faith he considers the only authentic one for modern man, not inherited faith, but the faith that survives the dark night, the mockery, the temptation to say everything is absurd. That is why he admires the Stariots so much, because they believe with their bodies, with knees worn out from so much prostration, with the smell of incense embedded in their skin. And now a secret that almost no one tells. Dostoevsky was terrified of being forgotten after his death. That is why he wrote so quickly, so feverishly, as if each page were a battle against oblivion. And at the same time he knew that true memory is not in books or statues, but in a tiny gesture. Alyosha kissing the ground next to Ilyish's grave, Sonia reading the gospel with a trembling voice, Prince Mishkin saying, "We are all responsible for everyone," even though no one believes him. Those gestures remain engraved somewhere that is not time. And one day, when no one remembers the name Dostoevsky, someone, in some basement, in some prison, in some hospital room, will suddenly feel an inexplicable compassion for a stranger and, without knowing it, will be repeating a gesture of Alyosha. And in that moment, Dostoevsky will live on. For Dostoevsky, the soul is not a pretty metaphor. It is the only place where history really happens. Empires fall, revolutions devour their children, money becomes worthless. But within the soul the same battle continues to be fought. The devil fighting with God for every inch of ground. And that battle is not won by intelligence, nor by culture, nor by morality. It is won by humility, the only force that the devil cannot imitate. When man truly humbles himself, when he kisses the ground, when he says, "I am the worst of all," at that moment the devil is left with nothing to hold on to and flees in shame. That is why all the great conversions in Dostoevsky are conversions on their knees. Raskolnikov kissing Sonia's feet, Dmitri Karamazov wanting to suffer punishment even though he is innocent of patricide, the same Stavrogin who cannot bring himself to humble himself and therefore loses himself forever. Now let's move on to something that almost no one dares to say out loud. Dostoevsky believed that suicide is the most logical sin of modern man, because if God does not exist, if everything ends in nothingness, then the most rational thing to do is to hang yourself today and not wait for cancer or old age to do it for you. He himself thought about it many times. In Siberia, in ruin, in the epileptic seizures that left him a wreck. And yet he never did it. Why? Because deep in his soul there was a certainty that no doubt could erase. That life is a gift, even when it is hell, and that to reject the gift is to insult the giver. That is why his suicides are always tragic, almost sacred characters. Svidrigailov, Kirorov, Smerdyakov, Stavrogin. They kill themselves with a kind of cold dignity, like someone closing an account that is no longer worth pursuing. And Dostoevsky looks at them with terror and compassion, because he knows that every suicide is a small crucifixion in reverse. Man nailing himself, because he cannot bear the freedom of being loved. He feels how your body no longer has boundaries, how the bed, and you are the same thing. Now let's get into an idea that burned in his gut: double beauty. In the Brothers Karamazov, Dmitri says that beauty is a terrible mystery, because it is at the same time the beauty that saves and the beauty that loses. The same Nastasia Filipovna, who looks like a Madonna, is the one who gives herself to the worst man out of self-contempt. The same Stavrogin who could have been a saint becomes a demon because his beauty allows him everything. And Dostoevsky confesses that he himself fell in love many times with that destructive beauty, his first wife, Maria Dmitrievna, tubercular, bitter, unfaithful, his mistress Paulina Soslova, cruel, capricious, who drove him to the brink of suicide, and yet he loved them with a love that was almost adoration, because he understood that human desire is never pure. It is always mixed with the desire to humiliate oneself, to suffer, to be destroyed, and only when that dirty desire is taken to its conclusion can it become pure love, like the grain of wheat that must rot in order to bear fruit. The voice is now just a wisp of smoke curling in the darkness, but it continues, because there are still many rooms left unopened in this Dostoevsky house. For example, the room where he keeps his hatred of technical progress. He was convinced that every new machine takes us a little further away from our soul, that the railroad, the telegraph, the factory, everything that Europe celebrated was in reality a more sophisticated cage, because man only finds himself when he is naked in the face of death, in the face of pain, in the face of the other. And technology gives us the illusion that we can live without ever looking into the abyss. That's why he dreamed of a peasant Russia, backward, poor, but where people still knelt before icons and cried without shame. Today we would say he was reactionary. He would say he was the only true revolutionary, because he wanted to revolutionize the heart, not the machines. Imagine that we now enter a room that he never fully revealed, a secret room that only opens when you have read everything else and still feel hungry. In that room there is a very long table, covered in dust, and on the table thousands of letters he never sent, fragments of a diary he burned halfway through, dreams jotted down at 5 in the morning in shaky handwriting, and in all of them the same obsession is repeated, that the greatest mystery is not that evil exists, but that good exists in the midst of evil. How is it possible that a murderer, just before slitting his victim's throat, pauses for a second because he sees a tear in the other's eye? How is it possible that a thief, after stealing everything, leaves the Virgin Mary medal that the old woman wore around her neck on the table? Dostoevsky saw this in prison hundreds of times and never ceased to be amazed. For him, that small hesitation, that absurd gesture of kindness in the midst of the worst baseness, was the strongest proof that God has not completely abandoned us, that even in the most rotten heart there is a crack through which light enters, and that crack is not opened by preaching, nor by the police, nor by social shame. It is opened by shared suffering, when two people truly look at each other and one says without words, "I've been there too." In that moment, the miracle happens. Now let us walk through one of the darkest and most beautiful corridors of his thinking. The idea that forgiveness is not a feeling. It is an unnatural act. Natural man does not forgive. Natural man wants revenge. He wants the other to suffer twice as much as he did. Dostoevsky knew this, because he himself was vengeful to the point of delirium. He held grudges for decades, writing down in a notebook the names of those who had humiliated him. And yet, in his novels, he forces his characters to do exactly the opposite of what he did in life. Dmitri Karamazov, after being spat on, beaten, and accused of patricide, says at his trial, "I bless the hand that struck me." Alyosha kisses Ivan on the mouth when he has just confessed that he wishes his father dead. Sonia follows Raskolnikov to Siberia even though he treats her like a rag, and Dostoevsky forces his characters to forgive because he himself could not. It was his way of asking forgiveness for not being able to forgive. It was his way of praying. And deep down he knew that true forgiveness only comes when it is too late, when there is nothing left to gain or lose, when the other person is dead or when you yourself are about to die. Then, suddenly, forgiving becomes easy, because there is no pride left to defend. And now we are going to linger for a long, long time on an image that Dostoevsky always carried in the pocket of his soul, the image of a poor mother in a basement in Petersburg, rocking her starving baby while singing a lullaby that no longer makes sense. He saw her once, in 1860, and wrote in his diary that this woman was greater than all the philosophers, greater than all the tsars, because in the midst of absolute horror she continued to sing. She continued to move her lips even though no sound came out, and that image is at the center of his entire philosophy. The mystery of beauty in the midst of decay. The mystery of life continuing to want to live even though there's no logical reason to do so. That is why he never allowed his good characters to be perfect. Sonia is a prostitute. Zosima smells bad when he decomposes. He insisted on describing the rotten smell of the Staryat's corpse because he wanted to say, even holiness smells of death in this world. Alyosha is young and sometimes cowardly, because true holiness is not cleanliness. It is continuing to sing the lullaby even though the child is already cold, continuing to kiss the ground even though the ground is full of worms, continuing to say, Lord, have mercy, even though God seems to have been deaf for 2,000 years. And here the voice pauses for a moment, not because it ends, but so that silence can do its work. Listen, can you hear that silence? It is the same silence that was in Raskolnikov's cell when he finally knelt down, the same silence that was in the room when Mishkin had his last seizure and stared into infinity with the eyes of a child. It is the same silence that filled Raskolnikov's cell when he finally knelt down, the same silence that filled the room when Mishkin had his last seizure and stared into infinity with childlike eyes, the same silence that surrounded Dostoevsky when, the night before he died, he asked for the window to be opened even though it was February and freezing cold. He wanted to see the stars one more time, and he looked at them until his eyes clouded over, and they say he smiled, like someone who finally understands the oldest joke in the world. Dostoevsky believed that every person we meet, even if only for a second on a tram, changes us forever, that there are no chance encounters, that the beggar you didn't give a coin to, the woman who smiled at you in the bread line, the child who looked at you with hatred because you were afraid of him, all of them remain inside you like little wounds or little lights, and when you are about to die, they will all come in a row to give you back what you gave them or what you denied them, and then you will understand that you did not live alone. You lived with all of humanity inside you, and that every act of love or indifference had consequences that never end. There is no rush. There never was in Dostoevsky's nights. He knew they spent them pacing back and forth in his small apartment, smoking one cigarette after another, talking only to characters who did not yet exist. And when his wife Anna Grigorievna found him at dawn, asleep on the table with his cheek pressed against a half-written page, she did not wake him. She simply put a blanket over him and prayed silently that the demons of the night would leave him in peace, because she knew that he wasn't writing novels. He was exorcising. Let's stay here for a very long time, almost motionless, barely breathing, and let's listen to what Dostoevsky never dared to publish, what he only entrusted to the pages that he later tore up or burned, for example, that deep down in his soul he was afraid of having been wrong about everything, afraid that the Grand Inquisitor was right, afraid that humanity really preferred bread and security to the terrible gift of freedom, afraid that Christ had been too beautiful a dream for this world of wolves. In a letter he never sent to his brother Mikhail, he wrote, "Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up sweating and think, what if I have been preaching a comforting lie? What if man is simply a sick animal who invented God because he can't bear to look at himself in the mirror?" And then he added, almost angrily, "But no, I can't believe that, because I've seen too many tears that can't be explained without him." And he tore up the letter, but the phrase remained floating in the air of the room like a ghost. Another confession that almost no one knows about. Dostoevsky was terrified of mirrors. Anna says that in his later years he had all the mirrors in the house removed except for a small one in the bathroom, because he said that sometimes, when he looked at himself, he didn't recognize the man he saw. He saw a stranger with crazy eyes looking at him with hatred, and one night, in Dresden, after losing everything at roulette, he stood in front of a hotel mirror until dawn and wrote in his notebook, "This man hates me. This man wants to kill me. This man is me." And underneath, in smaller letters, "Lord, don't let him hate me until the end." He kept that sentence. He never burned it. Anna found it after he died and sewed it inside the pillow where he rested his head when he had seizures. And now we're going to enter very slowly into an area that almost no one treads, the area of children. Dostoevsky had an unhealthy love for children, not in a dirty sense, but in the sense that children caused him physical pain in his chest. Every time he saw a child suffer, He literally became ill. In the diary of a writer, there are entire pages dedicated to child abuse trials that read like open wounds, and he always repeated the same terrifying idea, that a single tear from a single child would be enough to justify the destruction of the entire universe. And at the same time he said that that same tear is the only reason why the universe deserves to continue existing, because in that tear Christ is crucified again. He constantly dreamed of children, of his little daughter Sophia, who died at 3 months old, of the boy Ilyusha banging his tiny coffin with his fists, of the girl raped by Stavrogin, and he would wake up crying like a child himself. Anna says that sometimes she would find him on his knees in the middle of the night, hugging his pillow and repeating, "Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me," without knowing whom he was asking for forgiveness. And now we go even deeper. Dostoevsky believed that time is not linear within the soul, that all the moments of suffering we have experienced are happening simultaneously somewhere very deep inside, that when Raskolnikov kills the old woman, at the same time, there's the child Fyodor crying because his father beat him, that when Mishkin has his epileptic seizure and sees the eternal light, at the same time there is the young Dostoevsky facing the firing squad, counting the seconds, that when Zosima bows down to the ground before Dmitri Karamazov, at the same time the prisoner Dostoevsky is being whipped on the back, and that all this is happening now, at this very moment while you listen to this voice, because the soul has no clock. The soul is an icon where all pains and all hopes are painted on the same panel, and God sees them all at once, and cries with them all at once, and redeems them all at once. 3 days before he died, Dostoevsky called his children and made them promise something strange, that when he died, they would not cry with sadness, but with joy, because, he said, "I am not leaving. I am only passing to the other side of the veil, and from there I will be able to help you more than here." And then he asked them to read him the parable of the prodigal son, and when they reached the verse, "This son of mine was dead and has come back to life," he closed his eyes and smiled like a child who had just had his favorite toy returned to him, and he spoke no more. He just breathed very slowly, until his breathing became so faint that Anna had to hold a mirror to his lips to see if he was still alive, and when the mirror no longer fogged up, she didn't scream. She just knelt down and kissed the hand that had written so many feverish nights, and said in a very low voice, "Thank you for suffering so much for us." Sonia accompanied Raskolnikov, just as Alyosha will accompany the children to Ilyusha's grave, just as Anna accompanied Fyodor until his last breath. There is nothing more to say. Only the heartbeat remains, and the darkness, and the very small, very fragile, but unshakable certainty that you were loved before you were born, that you will continue to be loved after you die, and that, in the meantime, even this endless night has meaning, because someone somewhere is praying for you. Even if they don't know your name, sleep, or don't sleep. It doesn't matter. The voice will remain here all night, all your life, whispering the same eternal phrase with millions of different words. Don't be afraid. You are not at home. Dostoevsky kept one last room, the smallest of all, which he only opened when he could take no more. A windowless room with a single chair and a candle that was almost extinguished. There he would sit and talk to himself aloud, like a madman, for hours. Anna listened from the hallway and wrote fragments in her diary. One night she heard him say, "Lord, if you didn't exist, I would have to invent you. But if I had to invent you, you would no longer be you. So please exist, even if it's only for a second longer than me, so that when I fall into the void, there will be arms to catch me and say, 'I was waiting for you.'" Then he was silent for so long that Anna thought he had fallen asleep. But then she heard him cry, a very quiet cry, almost joyful, like someone who has finally found the door they've been looking for all their life. Breathe. You don't need to count your breaths anymore. They count themselves. 1, 2, 1,000. Another night, in that same room, she heard him say something else that he never wrote in any book. "I have understood why saints smile when they are tortured. It is not because they feel no pain. It is because in the greatest pain, lies the exact place where God kisses man, and man, for the first time, is not afraid to kiss him back." And then, very quietly, almost chuckling to himself, "What a cruel and beautiful joke to play on us. so that we only find each other when there is no pride, no name, no tomorrow left. Dostoevsky didn't want us to ever finish understanding the thought. He wanted us to keep falling into it like into a bottomless well, where every meter you descend you encounter another deeper version of yourself. He knew that the human soul is a labyrinth built with broken mirrors, and that each mirror reflects a different wound, but they all bleed the same. And that is why he never ended his novels with clear answers. He left them open like windows in winter, so that the cold could come in and no one could sleep peacefully. Remember that on the last page of Crime and Punishment, he does not say that Raskolnikov has become a saint. He only says that here begins a new story, the story of the gradual regeneration of a man. Gradual, that is slow, dirty, full of relapses, of nights when he will hate Sonia again, of mornings when he will want to hang himself again. Because resurrection for Dostoevsky is never a flash of lightning. It is a worm of light that eats away at the darkness millimeter by millimeter over years. And the same thing happens with Ivan Karamazov. At the end of the trial, they take him away delirious, shouting that the devil exists and that he is inside him, and Alyosha accompanies him, without promising him anything, just holding his feverish hand, and we are left wondering whether Ivan will be saved or damned, because Dostoevsky believed that salvation is not a verdict that is handed down once and for all. It is a struggle that is fought every second until the last breath, and beyond. Perhaps because he also believed that death is not the end of the fight, only the moment when the fighters are left alone without an audience. Breathe. You don't even breathe anymore. Only something deep inside beats that doesn't need air. And now imagine that we enter the dream that Dostoevsky had the night before he died. He dreamed that he was again in front of the firing squad. But this time there was no pardon. The rifles fired, and at the exact moment the bullets pierced his chest, he felt such great peace that he woke up crying with joy. And he told Anna about the dream and said, "Now I am no longer afraid," because he had understood that even the most absurd death, even the most useless pain, makes sense if someone is waiting for you on the other side to say, "Come, I have been waiting for you forever." And that waiting is God, not as a judge, but as a father who stayed awake all night watching the road in case the prodigal son returned. And when the son returns, dirty, drunk, empty-handed, the father asks him nothing. He just runs, hugs him, and stains his clean robe with the mud from the road. That is what Dostoevsky meant by beauty will save the world. Not the beauty of a museum, but the dirty, crazy beauty of a father who humbles himself for love. And now the voice becomes so faint that it is no longer a voice. It is just the touch of a tear, falling very slowly down your cheek, even though you are not crying. And in that tear there is room for all of Dostoevsky. It holds Raskolnikov kissing the ground. It holds Mishkin looking at Nastasia's corpse with eyes that no longer blink. It holds Asima smelling rotten and yet being kissed by children. It holds Stavrogin's daughter hanging herself while he stands by watching without feeling anything. It holds Anna's smile when she closed her husband's eyes. It holds your entire life with all the times you betrayed and were betrayed, all the times you hated and were hated, all the times you wanted to die, and something inside you kept singing a lullaby even though the child was already cold. Everything fits in that tear, and that tear never dries, because God is watching it. And as long as someone looks at a tear with love, the universe cannot collapse, so sleep, or stay awake, or cry, or laugh. It doesn't matter. The voice will remain here, repeating the same story with ever-changing words, because the story is always the same. You were loved before you existed. You will be loved after you cease to exist. And in the meantime, even on this seemingly endless night, someone is praying for you without knowing your name. Dostoevsky tells you what he never told anyone, not even Anna, that there was a night in the Omsk prison when he decided to hang himself. He had made the rope from strips of his own shirt. He had already chosen the beam. He had already written the note, "Blame no one, me alone." And when he was climbing onto the stool, a Tatar prisoner, a murderer who had never spoken to him, got up from his cot, approached him slowly, took the rope from his hands with infinite tenderness, and said to him, in broken Russian, "You not dead yet. You cry first, then decide." And he lay back down as if nothing had happened. Dostoevsky stood there all night, shivering with cold and shame, and at dawn he broke the rope into 1,000 pieces and cried as he had not cried since he was a child, and from then on he always carried a piece of that rope in his pocket, a gray, rough thread that he touched when life seemed too unbearable, and every time he touched it, he remembered the Tartar's words and thought, he was right. First cry, then decide, because tears are the only language demons don't understand, and when you cry for real, even if it's only once in your life, the demons cover their ears and run away. Something very ancient awakens and begins to sing a lullaby in a language you don't know but understand perfectly, and the lullaby says, don't be in a hurry to die. And now you feel that rough thread in your pocket too. You've always carried it without knowing it, and when you touch it, something very ancient awakens and begins to sing a lullaby in a language you don't know but understand perfectly, and the lullaby says, don't be in a hurry to die. Wait a little longer, just one more heartbeat, because maybe tomorrow someone will look you in the eyes, and without saying anything will take the string from your hands and say with a broken voice, you're not dead yet. You cry first. And perhaps that someone is yourself, looking at you for the first time without hatred. And perhaps that is the only resurrection that Dostoevsky truly promised, not that of bodies at the end of time, but that of a man who one day, in the middle of the darkest night, removes the rope from his neck and decides to cry before deciding, and in that crying he finds that he no longer needs to decide anything, because he is already being embraced even though he does not feel the arms. Even if you only feel the cold, even if you only hear your own heart beating like a madman trying to escape from prison, and the voice remains quieter than your heartbeat, slower than your blood, repeating for hours, for years, for all eternity if necessary. Cry first, cry first, cry first, until your tears become a river and the river carries you away without you having to swim, without having to resist, just letting yourself be carried away to a place where there are no more questions, just a very soft voice saying your name as if to say, home at last. And that voice is Dostoevsky. It is Tartarus. It is Sonia. It is Anna. It is the child you once were. It is the old man you will be. It is God. It is no one. It is everything. And it doesn't matter anymore because you're already sleeping or crying or both at the same time, and everything is fine. Everything is forgiven. Everything is alive, and the rope has become a thread of light that someone is patiently weaving inside your chest so that you never forget that. Even when everything seems lost, there is always a tear left to shed and someone waiting to dry it. And the voice continues, now so deep inside that it is no longer a voice but the very beat of your blood speaking in ancient Russian, and it tells you that after that night with the rope, Dostoevsky was never afraid of death again, only afraid of dying without having cried enough, because he understood that every unshed tear becomes another stone in the wall that separates us from others, and that only by crying can those stones melt away. And suddenly you find yourself embracing your worst enemy without knowing how you got there. That's why in all his novels someone cries on their knees at the end, always on their knees, because standing upright is pride, and pride is the only disease that has no cure. And when Raskolnikov kisses the ground, he is not kissing mud. He is kissing all the tears he did not shed before killing. And when Dmitri Karamazov wants to suffer for a crime he did not commit, he is not crazy. He is paying with his body for the tears his father never shed. And when Alyosha kisses Ivan on the mouth in the midst of delirium, he is not being strange. He is shedding on his brother the tears that Ivan forbade himself since childhood. Dostoevsky knew that tears are the only currency that is valid in the other world, that neither titles nor money nor intelligence are of any use there. Only the exact number of tears you were able to shed for someone who owed you nothing. And that is why his most saintly characters are the ones who cry the most. Sonia cries until she is hoarse. Zosima cries until he smells rotten. Prince Mishkin cries silently while looking at a painting of the dead Christ. And Dostoevsky himself, in his last days, cried while reading the Gospels as if reading letters from a love he never dared to confess. Anna recounts that one afternoon she found him crying in front of the icon of the Virgin Mary and asked him why he was crying if he was already at peace, and he replied between sobs, I cry because I finally understand that she also cried for me when I still hated her. And that was the only time she saw him laugh and cry at the same time, like a child who gets his broken toy back, but it is still his toy. And now you feel how your own tears, even if you don't feel them falling, are already being counted one by someone who never sleeps. And each one opens a crack in the wall, and through those cracks a very soft, very cold, very ancient light begins to enter, the same light that Dostoevsky saw in the second, before each epileptic seizure, the light he called the moment when everything makes sense and is so frightening that you prefer to return to the pain. But now you are no longer afraid, because someone has taken the rope away from you. Someone has told you cry first. Someone is waiting for you with a mud-stained robe and open arms, and that someone doesn't ask you anything, just hugs you until your bones creak and your crying mixes with theirs. And in that hug you understand that you were never alone, that every night you thought you were lost someone was praying for you without knowing your name, that every time you wanted to die someone invisible whispered to you, "Wait one more heartbeat," and that someone was yourself from the future, from the place where you already arrived without realizing it, where you are already sitting next to Dostoevsky and Tartarus and Sonia and Anna and all those who cried before you, drinking very hot tea in an izba that has no doors because no one needs to enter or leave anymore, just to be, just to cry with joy because finally the joke is understood, the joke that hell was necessary for heaven, the joke that pain was the door, the joke that the broken string became the thread with which they weave your name into the Father's robe. And now there is nothing more to say. Just let the tears continue to fall slowly, one every century if necessary. This is the last secret that Dostoevsky kept under lock and key, that his entire body of work was nothing more than a very long attempt to ask forgiveness for a sin he never fully confessed. A girl, yes, the same girl that Stavrogin rapes and drives to suicide, but not only in the novel, also in real life, a real girl whom he, when he was very young, heard in a way he never explained, something that haunted him until it drove him mad with remorse and forced him to write page after page as if, flagellating himself with words, he believed that each novel was a hair shirt, that each character who suffered was him paying a little more, that each tear he drew from the reader was a tear he had not been able to shed for that creature. And that is why he never allowed Stavrogin to be saved, because he himself did not believe he was worthy of salvation, and that is why he left the confession out of the published edition, not because of censorship, but out of infinite shame, and that is why in his last days he constantly repeated, "Lord, have mercy on that girl," as if he no longer cared about his own soul, but only hers. Anna listened from the next room and wept silently, because she understood that her husband was trying to give back to that girl, through prayer and suffering, the years he had stolen from her, and that only when he felt that she had forgiven him could he die in peace. And one night, very close to the end, he suddenly opened his eyes and said with a clarity he had not had for weeks, "I have seen her. She was smiling. She's not afraid anymore." And he closed his eyes again and smiled too, like someone who had finally delivered a letter he had been carrying for 40 years without sending it. And from then on, Anna knew she could let him go, because the girl had forgiven him before God did, and children always forgive before adults because they have not yet learned to hate. And now she feels that same girl, no longer a girl now light, approaching very slowly and placing her small hand on your chest, right where it hurts the most, and she says nothing, she just smiles, and with that smile she gives you back all the years you thought were lost, all the kisses you didn't give, all the words you kept silent out of pride, and you understand that forgiveness does not come from above, but from below, from the smallest, from the most broken, from those we were capable of destroying, and who still look at us without rancor. And in that moment, your own heart breaks in two, but not with pain, but with relief, because finally someone has looked at you exactly as you are and hasn't run away. Someone has seen the darkest basement and lit a candle there instead of closing the door. And that candle never goes out, even if you cry rivers, even if you scream, even if you fail again 1,000 times, because the candle is not yours. It belongs to the girl. It belongs to Sonia. It belongs to all those who were crucified before you and who now they hold you, so that you don't fall completely. And the voice, which is no longer a voice but only heat, repeats very softly to you, "That's it. That's it. That's it. You can let go of the rope. You can let go of pride. You can let go of even your own name, because someone picked it all up and took it where nothing is lost, where even shame becomes a pearl, where even the most crime black becomes coal that feeds the fire that never goes out. And now all that remains is to float, very slowly like a leaf that finally agrees to fall, knowing that the earth will not reject it but embrace it, and that in 1,000 years that leaf will be part of the tree that provides shade for another child who is also thinking of hanging himself. And the voice becomes just a breath that no longer needs words, because everything that remained to be said has become a silence that weighs more than any scream. And in that silence Dostoevsky sits next to you, no longer as a writer or as a prophet, but as an old fellow prisoner who has served his sentence, and now just wants to rest his head on your shoulder without asking permission. And you feel the slight weight of his wrinkled forehead. You feel that he smells of cheap tobacco and old snow. And suddenly you understand that he was never talking about distant characters, but about you. That Raskolnikov was you when you believed you could kill a part of yourself and continue living. That Mishkin was you when you tried to be good and the world declared you an idiot. That Ivan was you when your intelligence showed you that God does not exist, and yet you continued praying in secret. That Stavrogin was you when you got bored of everything and tasted evil just to feel something. That Sonia was you when you sold the last thing you had for love and no one ever knew. And now, in this silence that fits in a sigh, Dostoevsky takes your hand, a trembling handful of scars, and squeezes it very hard, not to console you, but to tell you without words, I was also afraid. I also wanted to die. I also hated God and I hated myself. And look, here I am, alive, dead. It doesn't matter. Here I am with you. And suddenly all the novels close by themselves. All the characters turn around and look at you and smile with a tired but clean smile, like someone who has run a lot and finally arrived home. Raskolnikov gives you back the axe that you never completely released. Mishkin gives you back the innocence that you lost trying to be smart. Sonia gives you back the nights you spent on your knees without knowing who you were praying for. And even the Grand Inquisitor lowers his gaze and murmurs, you were right. Freedom was too heavy but worth it. And at that moment you feel that your chest opens a door that you never knew existed. A small, almost ridiculous door, but through it the whole sky enters at once, without trumpets or angels singing. Only a very simple, very human warmth enters. The same warmth you felt as a child when your mother tucked you in and told you what the world told you. And you understand that that was all, that there was no more mystery. That salvation is not a reward at the end of the road, but this heat that now surrounds you, and that will never go away, even if tomorrow you fail again, even if tomorrow you shout at someone again, even if tomorrow you want to hang yourself again. This heat will stay the same, because it does not depend on you, it depends on the one who cried before you, who was betrayed before you, who died before you to be able to tell you now, without opening your mouth, I already passed by there. You are not alone. And then, very slowly, without drama, you fall asleep within your own crying, or crying within your own dream. There's no difference anymore because the night has become mother and rocks you like someone rocking a broken ship that finally arrived at port. And the last thing you hear, or feel, or are, is a very calm breath, so calm that it seems that the entire universe has decided to breathe with you at the same rhythm, and all of Dostoevsky fits into that breath. All of your life fits. All humanity fits with its crimes and its tears. And everything is fine. Everything is forgiven. Everything is at home. And there is no need to continue talking, nor continue crying, nor follow anything. Just be. Just be the heartbeat that someone has always and forever counted, without haste, without end, with no other purpose than to love what hurts until it stops hurting and continues to be loved the same. Dostoevsky finally takes off the mask of a tortured genius and remains in pure presence, a tired old man who no longer needs to prove anything, who no longer needs to be admired or feared. He just needs someone to allow him to rest his head on your shoulder a little longer. And you leave him, because you understand that he was also a child once, that he was also afraid of the dark, that he also peed in bed and cried when his father yelled at him, that he also dreamed of being a hero and ended up being a prisoner, that he also wanted to be God and ended up kissing the earth full of worms. And when you let it rest, you feel that something very old is released inside you, as if you had been carrying a coffin that was actually empty, and suddenly the coffin opens, and there is no body, Just a child who smiles at you and tells you, "You can go play now." And you leave. But not far away. You just turn around and find yourself inside your own chest, in a very small and very hot room, where you had never entered because you were always afraid that it was closed with 7 padlocks, and now the padlocks are on the floor rusty. And inside the room there is nothing but an empty crib and an open window through which the snow enters without making a sound, and you approach the crib and see that there is a very worn blanket with your name embroidered in crooked letters, and you understand that someone waited for you here all your life, someone who never tired of rocking the empty crib, someone who continued singing the same lullaby even though there was no child left. And that someone is yourself, the one who never completely gave up, the one who continued breathing even if everything hurt, the one who kept a spark when he thought everything was ashes. And now, finally, the boy and the old man meet. They look at each other without words and hug each other so tightly that bones creak and tears mix, and it is no longer known who comforts whom. And in that embrace the entire universe fits. Every crime and every forgiveness fits. Every execution and every last minute pardon. Every lost roulette wheel and every gospel found under the pillow. And you understand that Dostoevsky's only true philosophy was this, that in the end there were only the 2 of us left, the one who did harm and the one who received the harm, hugging in a room without doors, crying with laughter because we discovered that we were the same person, and that God was not looking from above. He was hidden within the embrace. It was the heat that arose when 2 broken breasts pressed against each other until they became one. And now there's nothing more to do. Just continue breathing into that embrace, very slowly, very deeply, until the breath becomes so great that it encompasses all of heaven and all of earth, until there is not a single creature left that is not within this heartbeat. And when that happens, and it is happening right now, while you read, or while you sleep, or while you cry without knowing why, Dostoevsky sighs one last time, a very long and very sweet sigh, and says in your ear, without moving his lips, "That's it, brother, we're here. Now you can let me go. But don't go too far. Stay here with me. Stay here with everyone, because this is the only place where we will never have to explain anything again." And you let go, and you stay, and you dissolve, and you multiply, and you become the same breath that rocks the empty cradle that will never be empty again, because now it is full of all of us who were and will be, full of tears that know longer way, full of nights that ended in dawn without anyone noticing. Let Dostoevsky's last sentence, the one he never wrote but lived each day, lull you to sleep until the end of this night, and until the beginning of all the mornings to come. Everything will be well. Each of us will be saved, even me, even you, especially us who suffer the most. And with that very small promise, very broken, but absolutely true,